Welcome to the Imagineering Education Podcast. This is Thomas Riddle. Thanks for joining us for conversations held at the crossroads of education and design, with a healthy dose of inspiration from Disney's Imagineers. Each week, we feature pertinent commentary on relevant issues and informative interviews with leaders and practitioners from the fields of education, design, entertainment, and more. In today's episode, we're talking writing, making, and design thinking, as well as exploring ways that educators and others can look after each other during these trying times. Today's guest, Angela Stockman, is just the person to speak with about these topics. Angela spent 12 years in the classroom before she began designing and leading professional development initiatives for teachers across New York State. She's also a former Krista McCullough Fellow and the founder of the Western New York Writers Studio, a community of writers and teachers of writing. For the last 12 years, Angela has been consulting, coaching, and designing curriculum and assessments alongside K-12 teachers in over 60 different schools, and is currently an instructional designer at Damon College. She's the author of several books about writing that include Hacking the Writing Workshop, Make Writing, and her recently released book, Creating Inclusive Writing Environments in the K-12 Classroom. Beyond all this, she loves sharing her ideas and her passion for teaching with others through active participation in multiple professional learning networks on Twitter. That's where I first discovered her work and began following her several years ago, and I'm very excited that we were able to recently connect and make some time for her to join us for this conversation tonight. So, Angela, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me and for such a nice introduction. It's great to be here.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad we were finally able to connect. One thing that you and I have in common from what I was reading in your bio is you love storytelling and stories. And I do too. And that's one thing we talk a lot about on this show. And we usually begin by asking our guests, what's your story? And so this is your opportunity to be a little bit of a storyteller. So tell us, what's your story? How did you get into education?
Ooh, I got into education because I had teachers that took good care of me, especially when I was in high school. And I think that they noticed that I may not have been particularly strong as a writer, but I was really passionate about writing. And that was kind of an uncommon thing in my high school, I think. And I had two teachers who pointed me in the right direction and made sure that I found good mentors and applied to a great college program where I met even, more inspiring teachers who helped me on my way. So I came into education because I think I wanted to become like the people who did such good for me in my own life.
Wow, that's so inspiring. You know, we often hear that about teachers either being someone that can make or break someone's future careers or their path, rather. And that's very inspiring to hear that there were teachers that inspired you. And so
for sure.
Yeah, were you interested in writing at a young age?
I was. I started writing when I was very young. I grew up in a pretty rural area, and there weren't a lot of kids nearby to play with. Also, there wasn't a lot of television, and there weren't a lot of technology tools to distract me. My mom would take me to the library pretty frequently when I was a kid, but I would still run out of things to read between visits. So I started writing my own stories so that I could read them back to myself, both in between library visits.
That sounds like my childhood as well. We lived, although we weren't very rural, there were no kids in my neighborhood, and I was an only child. And so read a lot and played a lot with my Star Wars toys. They became my outlet
Which is story writing.
It is, completely.
Yeah.
We write our own stories that way. And, my toys outside in the dirt and the water, and it's great. They became the characters in my stories. And I noticed, I have three sons, and they're all young men now. But 20 years ago, as they were coming up, and since then, I've noticed that kids don't seem to play with toys as much as maybe kids in our generation did. Like you said, we didn't have the distraction of so much technology, so many opportunities to engage with media, and I think that really, like you said, playing with toys is a form of storytelling. Can you expound on that some more?
Oh, sure. I think the most important lessons that I've learned by making myself a student of the writers that I support instead of positioning myself as a teacher exclusively is that play is really the heart of writing. And people who invest themselves in play, no matter how old they are, that's where they find their stories often. And I think children in particular have this incredible gift, and we learn this from the field of psychology too, that they're able to sort of transcend what's happening around them, particularly when those circumstances are upsetting. Children have the ability to dissociate, and that can become problematic later in life. But when they're young, they're able to use story and character to create worlds that they want to inhabit, and that eventually help them construct a reality that can be a little less anxiety producing. And so that can be a very healthy coping mechanism. Play is another form of that sort of thing, where we immerse ourselves in these worlds that are imaginary and that we construct, with toys. And so when we're young, we have the ability to do that psychologically, and our brain works in such a way that we can sink into play a lot easier. It's something that some adults are able, to maintain as they get older, and that's kind of a real gift. But what I've learned from young writers is that oftentimes those children of all ages, who sort of present as a so-called resistant or reluctant writer, oftentimes if I ask them what they would rather be doing instead of using pencils or pens or keyboards, what they tell me is something that looks like making, or it looks like play.
Mm-hmm.
And when I invite them to do that instead of playing with pencils, pens, or keyboards, there are always stories or arguments or even sort of research-based sorts of writing that's really the heart of what they're doing. So if you can watch a child play and find the story inside of that, or watch a child play and find the argument that they're making or what they're teaching as they're playing, then you have a pathway into the writing process that's kind of uncommon but incredibly human.
Wow. Yeah, you've hit on several points where we could unpack just that one little exposition right there for the rest of the time. You, again, are hitting on all my love languages here with play. And, I think that is something that we unfortunately drive out of kids too often in formalized education. We're seeing recess go away more and more. And that's the time when I was a kid. I don't know about you, but where that was kind of free play time for us, beyond just, kickball or things like that. My buddies and I would go out with sticks and try to dig to China, dig these holes in the back of the playground, or whatever. Or we would, when I was probably third or fourth grade, I loved the TV show, the Black Sheep Squadron, Pappy Bowington.
Mm-hmm.
And so me and my buddies used to, they loved it too. And, that was set in World War II, and they were pilots. And so we used to swing on the swing sets, and those were our F-4U Corsairs, and we were, flying through the sky, and we'd get hit. We'd jump out of the swing. We'd have to bail out. It was all of this creativity that went along with play. And, Don Hahn, who, he's the executive producer of Lion King and Beauty and the Beast, and he's done a lot with Disney over the years. Don has a really cool book called Brainstorm, where he's talking about the importance of creativity, cultivating creativity and imagination, especially for adults. Kids tend to do it pretty well, but especially, as you said, to your point, it's a real gift if you can maintain that as an adult. And Don says that play is the welcome cousin of creativity. When you're talking about making in the classroom, how much creativity comes out in your kids when you're giving them the option to make, which is a different form of play, as you said?
Well, it depends on whether or not the writers that I'm supporting have forgotten the language of play and the language of the materials that we work with. Something that I find really interesting, and I share this story often, is that once I began realizing the potential for things like loose parts, like Legos and blocks and buttons and sticks and stones and clay and Play-Doh, once I started realizing that they could play a significant role inside of what we were doing with writers, I would begin bringing them into classrooms when I was coaching. And one of the things that struck me right away was that when I handed primary level students, 5 and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds, play, they would create these incredibly intricate builds. They would create characters that had really specific features and really defining structures. And when I took that same bit of Play-Doh into an 8th grade classroom, kids would almost exclusively make spheres or balls and snakes or ropes.
Right.
And they would do that over and over again. And it wasn't until I went on a study tour, one of them in Reggio Emilia, Italy, and they were talking about the importance and the power of materials and the fact that every material has its own language. And that when we are new to using a material, we will often experiment with it to try to understand how it works. And so what occurred to me is that it was very possible that these teenagers had forgotten how Play-Doh worked because they hadn't used it for so long. And so they were doing these making these sort of very basic moves with it, right? They were making balls and they were making snakes, and one thing that teachers will say often is, well, they're going to throw that at each other and that they're going to be distractible and they're going to be off task, and they really are. And so one of the things that I always encourage is that before you're trying to use materials for academic purposes, like to make writing, you're going to want to give kids lots of time to just mess with them and to play with them and to remember how they work. So, I mean, the fact is that when I'm using materials and engaging kids in loose parts play, and they have had experience with that recently and they remember how to play, there's a ton of creativity that comes out. They're very comfortable with that process. They're very comfortable with the materials. And they're very comfortable being vulnerable and not doing it perfectly. But the other side of that coin is that when I'm working with young writers who are not, remembering what it was like to play, it can feel very threatening at first. And so I have to approach that with intention.
That's a great point. When do you think, or what do you think is causing this loss of the ability to play? Do you think it's well, I have some ideas, but I'm gonna ask you the question. What do you think is causing that disconnect?
Well, I'm kind of watching it play out a little bit. I'm watching it play out a little bit right now as we are grappling with this shift to either fully remote or hybrid or high flex learning, at least in my own world.
Right.
What I'm hearing is I'm hearing teachers who have a vision for how this might look, who are suggesting that, we're going to offer maybe a 10-minute lesson that is synchronous, where we're going to bring learners together online and we're going to immerse ourselves in some bit of learning that's really brief and that ends with a challenge. And then we're going to send kids offline to go tackle that challenge in a really authentic way. And when the kids move offline, they can go outside. They can build forts. They can do science experiments. We're gonna send them offline, and they can do some authentic writing. They can do it in a place where they're comfortable. They can actually do it in a place that isn't inside of their homes.
Right.
And what is happening is that certain leaders and certain parents are pushing back and saying, no, they need to be synchronous for all 40 minutes of your class, which is absolutely ludicrous. And we're hearing a lot of conversation around they're going to fall behind. This whole notion of they're going to fall behind, I don't think it's new because of what's happening with COVID-19 or the shift to remote. Right. I think that this perseveration on performance and competition is inherent in our culture. It's poisonous, and it's also a social construct. Like it isn't even valid.
Right.
And so our interest in competing and living vicariously through the human beings that we've created as parents and how they perform and how they achieve, the fact that we, are so open about sharing their GPAs and their grade point averages and competing over report card grades and bragging about that sort of stuff. It really illuminates a bigger, I think, value system that really drives. And I know it's easy to point fingers at governments and departments of education and standardized testing. But just like so many things, I'm not so sure that that's the cause or the effect inside of our culture. It's easy to blame departments of education and say that standardized testing is, ruining things. And there's certainly a lot of valid criticism that we could offer there.
Right.
But who wants it? Those things exist because somebody wants that.
Right.
And so I think, we are a very individualistic and very competitive culture. And I think that that's, what undermines play. And what's really, horribly ironic about that is it's play that would actually probably improve performance, but that's a whole other conversation.
Well, that's a conversation I'd love to have you back for. And we do a whole thing on play and get some other people in here to have a great conversation, because I'm going to tell you, that is, there's so much value to that. And if you're listening, if you're a parent, if you're a teacher, if you're just someone who's a friend of education, as Angela said, and I second that wholeheartedly, let your kids be kids. Let kids play. Let's don't hurry up the process of growing up. There's, again, going back culturally, I think there's this expectation that adults don't play. I don't get that. That, we're supposed to be serious, we're supposed to be working. And that I think, the faster we ask kids to grow up, we get them to focus on, you got to have the good grades, because you got to have good grades to get into a good school. You have to get into a good school to get a good job so you can get good pay. So, the undergrads I teach at Furman, I would often ask them, what's a good grade? What is that grade? What's a good school? What's a good pay? What do we mean by good? And you're right. I think it's so much systemically within our society that's so competitive that we want to get ahead. And again, as parents, I think it's easy to fall into that trap of, we want the best for our kids. But sometimes it's, we have to ask the question of ourselves, to what expense, or at what expense?
I think right now we're learning some really important lessons too, if we're willing to pay attention, because what I'm noticing is that agility really matters right now.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to talk about what makes someone a successful adult inside of this current crisis that we're living through, it's agility.
Right.
It's adaptability.
Yep.
It's the ability to understand what your skills are and situate them inside of entirely different contexts. And it's the ability to rethink and repurpose those skills and to be able to find different jobs and different opportunities. That agility really matters. And so when we are so fiercely competitive about producing small humans who get into good schools and then land these incredible jobs, if we do that in a way that eliminates play and playfulness and inventiveness and entrepreneurial sorts of thinking, what happens when the bottom falls out of that beautiful place, like platform that they've landed on? What happens when the ground beneath their feet starts to shift very rapidly? And I would love to believe that this is one moment in time and we're going to get past it and life is just going to, stabilize again. But I really don't feel confident that that's the case. So I think agility matters. And I think that resourcefulness matters, and inventiveness and entrepreneurial sorts of thinking and values, they really are what makes someone a successful adult now. And playfulness is central to that.
Yeah, think back when you were a kid. How many times did you start playing a game with friends, or even making something up yourself, and you changed the rules as it went, to adapt to whatever the situation was?
Right.
Or, you created something from what you had on hand. You built forts out of pillows and blankets because you didn't have logs, or you built castles out of milk cartons or boxes because you didn't have actual, a marked toy set or something. And so it's
Right.
that adaptability,
It's
like you said.
scrappiness.
That's it. And that's that. It goes back to grit too, right? So I can still have fun. It's funny. I had no intention of going off on toys and play right now, but I'm glad we have. 2 nights ago, I was having dinner with some friends. We were at their house out around the fire pit, and the conversation kind of came up about toys. Oddly enough, we were all adults, and one of the ladies in the group asked. She's very creative, very artistic, and she said, "All right, we're going to get to know each other better. What was your favorite toy when you were a kid, and why?" And we all thought about it in a second, and we kind of went around the group. And her husband, who was a very creative guy, his favorite toy as a kid was a trash can lid, he said, because that trash can lid, he said, we didn't have a whole lot of money, and I could use that trash can lid as a shield. I could use it as a drum. He said, then when I started reading Captain America comic books, I could throw that shield and hit my friends, and it became Cap's shield. But it's that flexibility, that grit, that I can make something out of nothing. And I think, to your point, it's very valid that in the days that we're currently in and moving into the future, we're going to have people that are very adaptable. And I think that's what companies want anyway. So if you're a parent listening, and you got your kids, because I know some like this, in SAT prep courses, and they're in 6th grade or 7th grade. Let them breathe, let them play, because that's going to serve them better in the long run, and going to make them actually more interesting if they continue to develop those skills to a potential employer later in life. Right. Yeah, I'll get off my play soapbox now with you. I think we're both up there shouting that, but that's so, so important. And I love going back to something you said, Angela, about the teachers who are doing the synchronous lessons for like 10 or 15 minutes. That's fantastic. And then turn them loose. I'm a huge believer, and I know you are too, as a practitioner of design thinking, in giving kids design challenges. And letting them go off and do something authentic. So how have you worked design thinking and making actually into your own classroom, or into the classrooms where you're consulting as an instructional coach? What are some good examples of people who may be interested in? So how do I'm an ELA teacher like you were. I'm not. I was a social studies teacher. But if someone says I'm an ELA teacher, but I'm really interested in making, how would that look? What would that look like?
Well, I think, in my own work as a consultant, I practice design thinking, in that a lot of the work that I do is rooted in empathy practices, where I do a lot of listening and needs assessment before I construct opportunities, for the teachers that I serve and the administrators that I serve. Mm-hmm. But the work that I do beside those teachers in classrooms, a lot of it is grounded in emergent curriculum design, and that's something, that I am very passionate about. I really believe that standards can offer a structure that enables creativity. And I think that the way that we approach our work with standards is really critical, because we can either treat them like chains and really confine people with the use of standards, or standards can become load-bearing walls inside of a blueprint for learning that kids construct. And as long as we know what the load-bearing walls are, they can roughen that frame and decorate in whatever way is meaningful to them. So for me, knowing what the standards are, that students, for instance, are going to write narratives, and they're going to write arguments, and they're going to write research and information pieces, and knowing what the sub-skills are inside of that, or the smaller learning targets at least, that allows me to give kids an awful lot of voice and choice around what they're writing and who they're writing it for, and even what modalities they're using. So I've learned a lot in recent years about why alphabetic text and print has come to be so privileged inside of our school systems. Mm-hmm. And what we know is there are so many other modes of expression, and that I know that I can have children of all ages, high school kids too, build arguments using Legos or loose parts. And when I ask them to do it with Legos and loose parts, they will construct that argument rapidly. And they will also speak to me about it using very sophisticated language.
Right.
Their ideas are protected because they are not trying to match their idea to their print power. I can literally watch children reduce the complexity of their ideas that they plan to write about the minute I tell them that they have to pick up a pencil, a pen, or a keyboard. They will want to write about something incredibly complex. They can talk with me about it. They can sketch it out. They can build it with loose parts. But the minute that I tell them that they have to put it down with print, they will change the idea. They'll reduce the complexity of that idea to match their print power. So for me, structure is everything. And that's sort of, the heart of making writing, is that if I know what the parts of an argument are, that you're going to have a claim, evidence to support that claim, you're going to anticipate what the counterclaim may be, and you might offer a refutation and then a call to action. If there are these like 5 or 6 pieces, why not build that? Why not paint it? Why not dance or talk it out with me? And I can assess the degree to which you have a coherent and a well-reasoned and an evidence-based argument. You don't have to put it down in print just yet. And I can get a sense of the full sort of sophistication of the idea that you have there. And then what we can do is transition it to print one small bit at a time. So you built me a claim using Legos about issues of inequity inside of your community, and you want to focus on this particular issue. Let's just work on writing that very beginning. You built it with maybe Legos or blocks, or maybe you built it with sticks and stones and leaves, and you're talking with me about it. I'm going to audio record what it is you intend to write with letters and words. Then you can listen to the audio recording over and over again. You can look at your pictures of your build, and we're going to write just the beginning with letters and words. Kids have stamina for that. And even if their idea is incredibly complex, I'm not asking them to write 5 paragraphs in one sitting. I'm asking them to write a paragraph.
Right.
They'll be willing to use resources and tools to figure out the meaning of certain words. And they'll be willing to pick up a thesaurus or crack one open using an app to find a just right word for that piece. And then I can give them feedback on just that little bit of writing. And so we transition from building a claim to actually putting it down with letters and words, because it protected the full sophistication of their idea. The full complexity of what they wanted to say was revealed in their build and what they made. And then they talked about it, and we audio recorded it, and then they're able to transcribe. And there's so much research around the effect of transcription on student writing, and we don't talk about this nearly enough in the field. But transcription is an incredibly powerful approach, and it makes kids better writers. And so for me, it's using materials in ways that allow kids to build the structure of something and talk about it. And Dan Ryder would call that share their intentions. Like, why did you use these particular materials in this particular way? Using materials also pushes metaphorical thinking. It's impossible to use materials and not think in symbol and simile and metaphor. Yeah, and that elevates the complexity of their writing as well. So then once that's built, then they can start to talk to me, and we can just talk through whether or not they need better evidence, where they might find it. Then they locate it, and we talk about it some more. And so a lot of the revision can happen through conversation and building and the use of materials and modalities other than print. And by the time we transition to print, it's happening one small chunk or block at a time. And so in that way, that's a different way of talking about multimodal composition. A lot of times when we talk about multimodality, we're talking about final products. We're talking about kids creating public service announcements, or creating stop motion videos for their stories, or 5-slide stories using images, right? Or comic books even. No, I'm talking about using multimodal expression in service to myself as a writer, in service to my process. And those loose parts are not pretty. They're not intended to be. There's no aesthetic inside of them, and I don't want that to be a priority, because then I'm going to have an art problem where I used to have a print problem.
Right.
So it's a different sort of way of thinking about multimodality, and it can work in service to the production of higher quality written words. So it's sort of a different approach.
Well, I love that approach. And I'm wondering, when you go in and work with classroom teachers, how do they respond? Because that is so non-traditional. And I'm a huge fan of non-traditional, but some aren't. What's been the reaction of teachers when you go in and work with them on this type of writing?
Typically, most of the people in the room are excited to have me there, because I'm typically invited to help solve problems that have really been kind of stones in their own shoes, right?
Right.
They are troubled by the fact that they're not able to get traction with the writers that they serve. They're sort of skeptical when in our maybe workshop session or an input session I'm sharing these ideas without kids in the room. And then I think that's why I spend a lot of my time coaching. So much of my work is usually with children, and teachers are kind of watching what I do. And that always seems to make a tremendous difference. First of all, they get to see what it is I'm talking about, instead of just hearing about certain approaches or even looking at pictures or videos. They get to see it in action, and then they get to feel the energy in the room and watch what happens with kids when I work this way with them. They also get to see what happens with kids who are very perfectionistic. There are many kids who don't want to do this, and I used to think that making was an invitation and not a mandate. But I'm beginning to rethink that quite a bit, because what I'm learning is that kids who have not had the opportunity to sort of hone their multimodal composition skills, they're at a disadvantage in every single field. The human beings who are of the greatest influence in nearly every professional field are able to translate what they would put down with written words into other forms.
Right.
And so I think quite a bit lately about the importance of expecting all students to learn how to use different modes of expression, and to get comfortable mixing them.
That's brilliant. And I love that idea. And I'm going to have to go away and chew on that for a little bit, because my mind's racing right now with so many ideas. I coached high school football and wrestling and track and field for a long time, mainly football, and just coaching in general in high school. You sometimes see kids that start to, at an early age, and again, it goes back to the parents, I think, a lot of times. I'm not hating on parents at all. I'm one, but I've seen parents sometimes put a kid, start playing one sport early on, focus on one sport, and they'll start in kindergarten or first grade, or they'll start in middle school, it doesn't matter. But they devote all their time to that one sport. And rarely, sometimes those kids that focus that singularly on something, they'll achieve, they'll succeed in that. But a lot of times my personal experience is seeing kids that focused on just one sport all the time, they burned out. And so I often think in terms of analogies, and I've really, I know that I've preached that for years. Let your kids play as many sports as they want to. It keeps them healthy. They're moving, they're active, and they get into high school. If they're a great football player, then let them play something else too. They don't have to just focus on one sport all the time.
Yeah.
And there'll be better athletes for it. And you're right. That translates into the classroom as well, because those kids who can only, like you said, those perfectionists who feel like I can only perform in this way. I'm a brilliant writer. I'm a great writer, but I suck at math, or science is not my thing, or any of those things, or I can only express myself one way, like you're talking about, not just subject areas, but only one way, one modality for expression. You're right.
But if you ask someone to flip, does the world really want to read my 10-page argument on something? And if I could actually turn that into, a sketch note, if I could turn that into a stop motion video or a public service announcement or even a musical composition,
Right.
what's the likelihood that I might reach a wider audience and a more motivated audience even?
Right.
If I'm able to translate the written word into another form. This is a really important skill, especially right now.
So
That's the
go ahead. Sorry.
That's the irony inside of the whole curriculum issue, as well as we perseverate on print inside of schools, and we privilege, alphabetic text in print. But the fact is that when kids go out into the world, every profession is the most influential people are going to be those who are able to use multimodal composition. And that's the greater challenge.
Yeah, think in your own workplace. If you're an adult and you're or you're a parent and you're listening, or even if you're a teacher, think about how often you have to present data or information in multiple ways for multiple audiences to reach the greatest impact. This is what we're talking about, And so why would we not start to encourage kids to develop those talents early on in school? And one part of me wants to answer, well, because that doesn't fit easily on a standardized test. You can't bubble in that art project or that PSA that some kid has created that is brilliant. Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. And I hope that there will be more people that will adopt that method that you're promoting. And, if you guys aren't familiar, and what we'll do in the show notes for this episode is that we'll put links in there to some of Angela's books, or all of the books that she's written on writing, and even the one on hacking school culture as well. But I think she has some really good ideas that would benefit teachers across grade levels, because we're not just talking about writing in ELA. One thing, no. We're talking about writing across the curriculum, correct? Which needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My wife's a math teacher, and she's been a proponent for years of making her kids write in her classroom. And so we're talking about writing across the curriculum. But Angela has some really good ideas, like the ones that she's been sharing just a little bit tonight with us. So definitely want you to check those out, and so you can learn more. As we're getting close to wrapping this up, I want to get to a couple other things real quick. A few weeks ago, I came across an idea of Angela's while we were on Twitter, that she was creating a support structure for teachers in this time that we're really facing so much uncertainty, as teachers definitely are. All of us are, but teachers who are having to rethink the way they teach, radically change the way they instruct students. And so there's a lot of people that just need some extra love. And so Angela was promoting this idea called Circles of Hope and Care, and creating a community, I think is what she's talking about, to support each other. Can you tell us a little bit what your idea was for that? I think you just kind of threw that idea out there, and but tell us more about Circles of Hope and Care.
Well, I think for a lot of different reasons right now, we have this perfect storm of incredibly challenging and frightening things happening all at once, and we're still having to function inside of this professionally and showing up, for our families and for our friends on top of it. And it started to occur to me that, the distance that we're all sort of trying to create in order to keep each other safe, it's also making people feel really isolated. Mm-hmm. And so I just sort of threw it out on my Facebook page one morning in my Facebook group, Building Better Writers, that wouldn't it be great if we kind of huddled up a little bit and you pulled maybe 3 or 4 or 5 friends into a circle that was committed to checking in on each other. And, there are no rules around it. And you don't, and you want to take care not to make it a really disingenuous sort of duty that you have to perform. But a friend of mine reached out to me right away and said, hey, how about the 4 of us, 5 of us exchange phone numbers, and we should, just take some time to check in with each other here and there, and maybe share a funny meme or send a funny picture or tell us when you're having a bad day or something's breaking down, and we can kind of hold each other up a little bit. What I was finding was that when I was having especially bad days, being able to see a friend, share photographs of her puppy, or something funny that happened, to another friend that day, it lightened my mood a little bit, and it made me feel a little less alone. And so I just sort of pitched that idea out into the cyber sphere. And I think some people have picked up on it, but I'm just really grateful for the women who are a part of my circle, because there are no rules. Sometimes you don't hear from someone for a couple of days, but someone will send a photo of a beautiful sunrise, on a lake when they were walking in the morning, and someone else will send a photo of the eye cream that they're wearing every morning before they go on Zoom. That was kind of me, to look a little bit more human, and it's just funny. And someone else will say that something happened with someone that they care about and they're worried, and we can kind of circle up around that and check in on each other. I think all of us are sort of needing people that we feel are a safety net a little bit right now.
Right.
And especially people that perhaps are not your closest family members or your closest friends, because there's so much hard right now that I sometimes feel like if I'm constantly telling my closest friends or my husband every rough experience I'm facing, they're going to burn out really fast. And so we kind of created this little community that has this extra added layer of support, and I'm wondering if we might do that with students too. And I think the point is to not necessarily be pulling in the people that you're closest to, but this is like a second ring almost, and it distributes the stress, I think, a little bit better.
That's a great reminder that you've just given all of us, Angela, is to check in on each other, take care of each other, and you've also stepped on my toes a little bit, because I've heard my wife say the same thing that what you were just talking about, is that sometimes I will, things have been hard in this season, and sometimes she catches the brunt of it in just conversation. This has happened, and fortunately I'm blessed that I have a group of men I meet with on Thursday mornings before we all go to work.
Yeah.
And
so there's your circle.
It is, and so she'll kind of smile and say, "Hey, go tell it to the guys,"
Yeah,
and I get that.
It's protecting your other relationships with people.
You're right.
And I think we need to take care to do that right now.
Yep.
Because we can, and I think young people need to learn this. I have this conversation with my daughters a lot, and they're young; they're in their early 20s. But I'm impressed that they have figured this out. Where I've said to them, you cannot expect any best friend or any mate or partner or sibling to be all things for you.
Right.
And if you expect every friend that you have to be all things for you, you're going to blow up that relationship. Instead, sort of think about, when I need this sort of feedback, this is the friend I'm going to ask, because they're really good at this. If I need validation, I know who to turn to. If I need critical eyes on something, if I need someone who's going to call me out on my BS, that's who I need to talk to. If I need a heartwarming story or to remember, sweet things in life, I know which friend I'm going to turn to for that. And I'm not always going to take my problems to the same person over and over and over again, especially right now, because it's daily. Today was a good example of that. I worked from 7 this morning until 5 o'clock tonight in my role as an instructional designer. And then I spent 90 minutes screencasting videos for staff development I'm facilitating tomorrow, and screencast if I crashed, like right toward the end of this, and everything fell apart. And I walked downstairs, and my 23-year-old is flying home tomorrow from Brooklyn for a visit, and my husband's vacuuming the house and trying to help me out with that. And I just looked. He goes, "You look white as a sheet." I said, "Yeah, had this really long day, and then I capped it off with trying to videotape this stuff, and it just completely fell apart. And in the middle of me telling him this, I'm realizing I've been dumping stuff on him for like the last 3 days, frustration over things happening. And so I think taking care to reach out to other people and just kind of distribute the load that you're putting on people is hugely important. And also, have enough energy to listen to other people too.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Thank you for that wisdom, Angela. Mm-hmm. And that's something I'm gonna have to go home and apologize to my wife, because I've done the same thing. And I'm gonna tell her that. I said, her name's Angela as well. And
how funny.
Yeah. So, but seriously though, thanks for sharing that. And folks, do take care of each other. We are all in this together, especially. I was about to say especially in education, but it's all of us in general. If you are an educator, and we know the special circumstances that you're in because of our shared experiences, but just find that circle. I challenge you before a week. Let's go ahead. My wife's always challenging me, put a date on it, put a time on it. And so in the next 7 days, see if you can come up with 5 people that you could support and they could support you. And again, as Angela said, not to make it something that's just one more thing, as there's a mandate to do something, but just to be human with each other, to love on each other, and to help each other get through. It's the little words that we say to each other, sometimes in passing, that we have no idea what the ramifications could be, either positive or negative. And so keep that in mind as we're moving through this next week and into the future. But wow, Angela, this has been a quick time. And, I know you've had a long day. I just heard about that. And I'm sorry that we've kept you so long. So
this is a great conversation and a perfect way to end it.
Yeah, well, I tell you, it has been really inspiring to me, given me a lot to think about. And I know that it will for our listeners as well. And I'm serious about coming back and talking about place and time. I'd love to get several of us perhaps kind of in a panel discussion on that topic.
Because, that'd be fun.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about and unpack with that. So before we go, though, if you could tell folks how to follow your work, that would be great. I'd love for you guys to keep up with what Angela does. It's fantastic. So what's the best way for them to follow you?
They can find me on Twitter at Angela Stockman, or in the Building Better Writers group on Facebook, or they can Google me. AngelaStockman.com is my website.
And the newest book just came out, correct? Is that right? Did I have that right?
It did today. Today is the launch day.
Oh, wow. How about that? Well,
yeah.
And that's about creating an inclusive classrooms. Is that right?
It is. It is about creating inclusive writing environments. It's for K-12 teachers, and it kind of challenges our traditional notions of reluctant and resistant writers, and offers up some tangible strategies that might be useful.
Well, be sure to check that out. I know I will. And in the meantime, Angela, good luck with everything, all the work you're doing. Thank you for the work you're doing. It's very important, and thank you for the lives that you're touching.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for being here with us. So, folks, if you'd like to learn more about Angela's work, we're going to, as I said earlier, we'll include that information in the show notes. If you'd like to learn more about our work at Imagineering Education, including our workshops, webinars, speaking engagements, and more, you can visit our website at imagineeringedu.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at ImagineeringEd, and Facebook at Imagineering Education. We hope you'll also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. And when you do, don't forget to leave a review. So until next time, remember that there's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow just a day away. Be blessed, everyone.